Now, before I go any further, I just want to extend a special thanks to Dr. Sarah Wright, who was my collaborator on this project and the co-author of the guide. Some of you may know Sarah. Sarah's based in New Zealand, and therefore, because of the time differences, it would be very difficult to schedule something that would suit everybody. So as we go through this, this is presented very much in terms of the we that have worked on this, not the I alone. So what are we hoping to achieve with this? Both of us, Sarah and I, are passionate about this particular topic, helping people connect and avoid feelings of loneliness in the workplace. And so what we wanted to do was put something out there that anyone could get their hands on, to give them an insight into the experience and where it comes from, and more importantly, what they can do about it. So therefore, we haven't put anything in the way of getting these resources. There's no sign up, there's no membership, anything like that. If you go to that Connect and Thrive page, everything is available for download. So I would actively encourage you from this point on to share that with people in your network, because that's the intention, to get this stuff out there. It's really nice to see a few familiar names on this session. As we go through, please feel free to use the webinar chat to drop in any questions or comments from me. I'll keep an eye on that as we go through. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard MacKinnon. I'm a practitioner psychologist with over 20 years experience of applied work. I started this organization, WorkLifePsych, coming up to 8.5 years ago, which has gone by very, very quickly. And what we do is provide people development solutions, coaching, training, and development programs. And we work across 3 areas, helping people at work with their development, with their productivity, with their interpersonal effectiveness, and with their well-being. And that's why this topic is of particular relevance to what we do at WorkLifePsych and why I'm particularly interested in it. This experience of loneliness has the potential to have an impact on all of these things. If you want to know more about me or the organization, all of the links are on screen there. And I mentioned My Pocket Psych, which is our podcast, and I recorded an interview with Sarah a few weeks back, and so you can listen to that episode and hear it direct from her, her expertise when it comes to this topic. And you can find a link to that on the Connect and Thrive page on the website. Enough about me. What are we going to talk about this afternoon? I want to explore a little bit about why loneliness is so relevant to what my professional focus sounds like, what I do, and how I've come across it. I'd be keen to hear from you about your experience of how you've noticed this as a theme in any of the work that you do in the organizational settings where you find yourself. Really importantly, I want to cover off some very common misconceptions about this topic. There are many ways that workplace loneliness is misunderstood, and this contributes both to the difficulties in bringing it up as a topic, but also some of the misplaced organizational interventions to try and improve things for people. I want to underline the importance of social connection in the workplace. It is not a nice to have. It is an essential. And we know this as humans through our lived experience. But as we outline in our guide, Connect and Thrive, research consistently shows that this is a really important part of our experience of the workplace. I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to go through the experience of workplace loneliness, to link that up with some of the misconceptions, what it's not down to, and where it can arise, what it can feel like, and how it contributes to our behavior, because that's where some of the impact comes in. Because loneliness is not just a difficult topic to talk about, it's a serious threat to our well-being and our effectiveness at work. But then I want to turn on to a much more positive focus and talk about what can we do. Now, our guide was written for individuals. So for the individual to read it and look at the evidence and look at some simple steps that they can take. So what I want to outline are those steps. And what I did in contributing to the guide was look at this through the lens of acceptance and commitment theory, or ACT, which is an evidence-based approach to support people's well-being and effectiveness at work. And it gives us a really neat framework and a simple framework for explaining this to the average person out there. And then I'll outline some simple next steps for you. So what did we do and what can you get your hands on? By visiting that link, Connect and Thrive, you'll have an opportunity to download the guide. And that is supported by quite a few digital resources on that page. So we've pulled together some things that support people understanding how to develop these skills, because ACT is a skill-based framework that anyone can develop. And we've also pulled together an initial list of international sources of support. And a quick cursory glance on that will illustrate to you it's far from complete from around the world. So please, if you're not located in the Anglosphere, please get in touch with any links that you think we should have on this resources page that will help employees and managers and organizational leaders around the world. So that is the page to go to, and everything I referenced today is going to be on there. And for those of you that have just joined us in the last couple of minutes, you're very welcome. Just to confirm, I will be sharing the slides from this session as well. So let's start at the very beginning. What do we mean by workplace loneliness? How can we encapsulate this and describe it? It's really important that we're on the same page with this and we have a shared definition. So the one that we've been working to in the work that Sarah and I have done is that it's the discomfort associated with perceived relational deficiencies in your work. So it's in the work domain, and it is what you feel, the stuff you don't like, the discomfort, because of your perceptions around relationships at work. There's a few really important points in this definition that I'm going to return to, but it really is different to a lot of the mental images we have about people who are alone or whose personality lends itself to a more introverted style. This is not the same as that at all. This is when we've made an evaluation about the quality of our relationships, we found them to be deficient in the workplace, and we feel discomfort as a result. There's some very good reasons for us to feel that that is an uncomfortable experience. And we can see it quite obviously from an evolutionary perspective that we've evolved to be social creatures. And if we feel that there is some level of exclusion or that we're not as much in the group as we would like to, if we don't have bonds with those around us that are as strong as we would like, well, then it's painful. And the problem with workplace loneliness is that this discomfort can lead us to change our behavior, and that can have some further knock-on negative impacts to our relationships and to our well-being. So why am I particularly interested in this topic, and why do I think it's really important to sort of raise it up the list of things that organizations need to pay attention to? Well, I want to share by the end of this session how it relates to these three topics that I'm really interested in professionally. Consistent research over decades has shown that loneliness over a period of time has a significant negative impact on our well-being. And I want to share some of those findings with you a little bit later on in summary, but they're detailed in our guide. It also has an impact on our interpersonal effectiveness because of our beliefs about ourselves and our beliefs about others and the risks involved in reaching out and making connections with others. And because of some of the ways it can impact our behavior, it can have a very strong negative impact on our productivity. And just keeping it nice and simple, not about doing more or doing everything, but in fact, just doing the right stuff in the right way at the right time. A lot of the ways that loneliness can impact us take us away from the present moment, take us away from focus, and take us away from the kind of collaborative work that's required of so many of us. The other thing to note is that loneliness is an incredibly common experience. This is counterintuitively what makes it quite difficult to discuss for some people, because they believe they're in a minority and they believe that they're the only person who thinks this way. I wanted to pull out a few points from our guide that underline this point. We see nearly half of adults in the UK say that they feel occasionally, sometimes, or often lonely. And this means that on average, around 30 million people here in the UK are experiencing loneliness. Similarly, in the US, around 50% of people are reporting feeling lonely. And about 10% of the population are currently struggling with chronic, severe loneliness and the mental health challenges that come with that. So this encapsulates quite a broad selection of people, from those people who will go through a very transient, temporary experience of loneliness, maybe due to organizational change, or maybe starting in a new role, all the way through to the people whose experience of workplace loneliness is having a significant impact on their well-being. And for anyone who's joined this session who comes from a psychology background, you may well suspect that some of these represent an underreporting of these, because it is a difficult topic to talk about. It could well be a more significant problem than we're aware of. Now, I want to talk about some of the really common misconceptions when it comes to workplace loneliness. And these could well apply outside the world of work, but that's my professional focus. And as we go through this, if you've got any comments or questions about this, please feel free to drop them in to the webinar chat. It's available to everyone, and keeping an eye on it as we go through. So how is it that we can misunderstand something that is such a shared human experience? Well, first of all, loneliness is not the same as being alone. Often, when we think of people who are experiencing loneliness, our mental image is of someone who is sitting by themselves. But it is absolutely possible for us to experience loneliness and be in the middle of a crowd of people. We can be among our colleagues for so many hours of each day, every week, and still experience loneliness. So it's not the same as solitude or isolation. Solitude and isolation can both be either a neutral or even a positive experience. Loneliness is a subjective, negative experience. And so we don't want to equate it with how many people we're surrounded by or how much contact we actually have. Just spotted a question pop up there from Nirmal. As we consider hybrid or remote working, should managers ask as part of the conversations with their teams whether they're affected by loneliness and have strategies on how managers can support when employees are not in workplace environment? Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to return to this topic a little bit later on. It's really important that we understand what we can do to support people. And in some of the content later on, you'll see some very simple things that managers and team leaders can do to get their heads around this difficult topic. So thanks for the question. I will return to it later. We can also believe that someone's experience of loneliness stems purely from poor social skills, whatever that represents. We might believe that in some ways, this points to a sense of blame. It's someone else's fault for not having the skills, and that's why they're lonely. This is not the case at all, as we'll see when I look at what the experience of being lonely is actually like, why we arrive at that calculation, that estimation of the quality of our relationships. It's not down to people working remotely or in a blended learning fashion. As I said, we can be in the office every day of the week, surrounded by our colleagues, and still experience loneliness. And this runs counter to a lot of the narrative about people must get back to a shared physical workspace because it's good for innovation, it's good for relationships, it's good for a lot of stuff. A lot of that narrative exists in an evidence-free vacuum, if you like. It's personal preference. And so what we don't want to do, again, is mix these things up. Some people are eminently suited to work by themselves in a remote location and will never experience loneliness. There's much more to it than that. There can be a managerial belief that if someone is lonely, that's their problem. And what I want to indicate is that it is actually a problem for everyone involved. It's a problem for the organization as it is for the individual. And organizations have a responsibility to cultivate an environment where people can be their best selves. And some of the reasons that loneliness can exist are because of how organizations organize themselves, the culture, managerial skills, the messages that they give out about interpersonal connection. So loneliness is definitely not an individual personal problem. It's an organizational and indeed a societal problem. What's really important for individuals to understand is that their loneliness is not necessarily a permanent experience. Believing that it's going to be this way forever can lead us to engage in unhelpful ways of coping with it and stop us from trying to do anything positive to change our experience. It can be a very transient experience that we can go through because of the stuff that's happening around us, because of what we notice, because of the context we're experiencing. But it need not last any longer than that. And by the end of this session, you'll have an insight into some very simple things that we can do to address that. Something that I and a number of my colleagues observed during our COVID lockdown experience, which was very, very difficult. And it gave many of us an insight into disconnection from others and what that's like. We observed that many organizations attempted to deal with this by scheduling lots and lots and lots of online social events to prevent, in a very well-intentioned way, to prevent people feeling disconnected. But of course, having lots of social events doesn't necessarily give people the insight or the skills to meet people and deepen their relationships. Social events do not suit everyone in terms of their responsibilities, their caring responsibilities, their personality preferences. And it's not enough just to expect that these things will automatically have benefits arising from them. This is something that can add value for sure, but it's not the answer to organizational and workplace loneliness. So why is social connection so important to us? And let me broaden it a little bit. What do we mean by social connection? The quality of the relationships, the social relationships that we have in the workplace. And this isn't the same as all my friends are in the office. This is just the people that I work with. I feel I have a good quality connection with. I feel I can communicate with them. I feel I could be supported by them. I feel I know them. I feel that they know me. I feel understood, and so on. And I wanted to pull out a couple of lines from our guide that summarizes the research supporting this. The evidence shows that having positive social relationships supports our happiness, our life satisfaction, improves our health, strengthens workplaces, and are therefore also good for the bottom line. They're not a either or, and they don't fly in the face of organizational efficiency. High quality relationships show a consistent positive association with mental and physical health. Having good connection with others is good for us. And there's many, many different perspectives on this. Having good quality relationships allows us to put our values into action. It allows us to learn from others. It allows us to get a sense of meaning and purpose. To go back to an earlier point I made, from an evolutionary perspective, it allows us to avoid feelings of exclusion and to understand how we're doing in the group, how well we're doing, and to see how much we're valued and how our contribution is going down. Unfortunately, in many organizational settings, positive social relationships are not supported by what's valued in the organization, or indeed what's lived. And what's said to be valued can often be quite different to what's lived, what's reinforced and supported, or indeed how work is organized. If work doesn't give us a chance to build quality relationships, they're not going to happen by themselves. I'll call out one example that I've come across a lot over the last 3 years, which has been where people have no longer had the opportunity to have brief catch-up conversations with their colleagues about anything, because working in a hybrid way means that their calendars are full for the entire working day of back-to-back meetings. Because we get some efficiency in working remotely, and we don't have to move from room to room or building to building, and we can have lots of these meetings. But I would argue that's on paper. We're humans, and we still need those breaks in between. We still need that connection. That's not about what's on the agenda for this meeting, but the agenda of how are you? And let me tell you something about me. And this is really, really important. So we can see some unintended consequences of how work is organized if the drive for efficiency doesn't allow for some of that interpersonal, non-agenda connection. Now, I'm really interested to know why you're here today, because this is quite a difficult topic to discuss, and not everyone is comfortable even mentioning the words loneliness or relationships at work. So as I go through this, I'd love to see in the webinar chat if you've got a particular reason you're here today, if there's anything specific that you really want to get out of this session. Seen another question just pop up there. Thanks for the questions. Could a positive start be made by providing a new employee a buddy during their initial probation period so that they have a go-to person as well as a line manager and colleagues? I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think knowing who you can go to for support allows you to be less likely to keep worries and concerns or questions to yourself. It's as important, though, that we get to know the other people on our team and know them as people and not just job titles, or see them doing their job. So getting to know people as people, however we can do that, is really important. But knowing and feeling that you're supported, in other words, you have a line of support. There's someone you can go to when you have problems or you just need some input or advice, is really, really important. Another question there from Austin, thank you. Wondering if you have any figures on the prevalence of loneliness in the workplace in Asia or Asia Pac. I don't have those to hand. I'm going to have a look at the resources we pulled together, and we'll share those after, but there's nothing I have to hand, Austin, right now. So why is it so difficult to discuss loneliness, and what might prevent people from speaking up about it? There is social stigma attached to the whole concept of loneliness. We can feel very uncomfortable when someone tells us they're experiencing loneliness. Apart from the surprise we might feel because they don't seem to us to be a lonely person, whatever that is, there is a sense that we might wonder, well, why are you lonely? What have you done to be lonely? Or why can't you not be lonely? And of course, if there's a shared understanding that this is a stigmatized topic, then it really makes it difficult for people to speak up about either their own experience of loneliness or to raise it with people around them. So to come back to our very first question that we had there about the different working arrangements and what managers can do, ensuring as much as possible that interpersonal relationships and open communication and conversation and chats are destigmatized, can really help people reach out, can really help people have quality conversations and get to know the people around them at a level that is what they need. So there's no one size fits all. And this is why it's a complex situation. What I need in my workplace relationships and my professional relationships will be different to each of you. It also means that for managers, they should not use their own selves as the benchmark. This is really important, that if they don't value chats in between work or meetings, if they feel they have enough connection, that doesn't mean everyone else in their team or in the immediate environment will be getting what they need. So asking about how people are doing around this. This doesn't imply, are you lonely, being a helpful question, far from it, but asking people how much apart they feel of things, how valued they feel, how much they're getting in the way of support. Understanding that, because the stigma associated with loneliness can also mean we don't identify with loneliness ourselves. We mightn't apply that label to our experience because we don't see ourselves as a lonely person, but this is actually what we're experiencing. Therefore, the psychological discomfort that comes with that, this is an umbrella term for all of the thoughts and feelings we don't want to experience. That means we can shy away from exploring it. It acts as a bit like a smoke alarm telling us to, move in the opposite direction. And as we'll see later, this can lead us into some unhelpful, avoidant coping strategies, which means that we're less and less likely to have the contact with people that can really help us build and deepen these relationships. A really good example, and a really unpleasant example of psychological discomfort, is our fear of rejection. And our minds can build up an image of us imagined reaching out to someone, asking them how they are, asking them if they've got time for a coffee, asking them how their weekend was, and getting shut down. And the fear of rejection and the discomfort associated with that mental image can be enough to stop us talking about it. And of course, our self-concept plays a really large role here. There's a few different ways it can do it. One could be, as I said, we may not see ourselves as a lonely person. And so we don't want to talk about loneliness because that's not me. And at the other end of this continuum, we may very easily label ourselves a lonely person. And that comes with blame, self-blame, and self-criticism. There must be something wrong with me. And nobody likes to talk about those things, or few of us like to talk about those things. So that can make it even more difficult because it's not an interpersonal experience as much as it's being framed as something is wrong with me. It can also be difficult if the culture around us at work doesn't look or seem like it supports conversations about this. If what is being reinforced all around us are things like success, monetary success, or organizational efficiency, or indeed happiness at the cost of everything else, then it can be difficult to push back against that and raise a topic that might not go down well with everyone. And this links really closely with the concept of psychological safety. This is a shared experience, say at the team level, of whether it's safe to take interpersonal risks. And speaking up about your own experience of loneliness is a prime example of an interpersonal risk. Do you feel that you'll be listened to? Do you feel that you'll be supported? Or do you feel and believe that you'll be criticized or shunned even more for raising something that's a little bit uncomfortable for others? And of course, the extent to which we feel supported by our manager will play a big role in this. So again, coming back to our original question, what is it that managers can do to make this easier for people to discuss? Anything that supports the development of psychological safety will make it easier for people to speak up about difficult topics, not just loneliness. And that's a win-win. Lots of things could be raised and discussed and explored, and expectations managed as a result. But this isn't just maybe the stereotype we might have of a unhelpful manager or a overly tough-minded manager, but a manager who emphasizes how busy they are and doesn't have time or will come back to you later. A manager who consistently reschedules one-to-one catch-ups because they've got too much to do or they've got too many meetings to attend. Apart from anything else, apart from speaking to your own productivity, this sends out the message, I haven't got time for anything that's not of prime importance to me. And we can easily do that to each other. So it's not, we're not necessarily talking about toxic manager behaviors as much as what is the message that the manager is giving out to members of the team about their availability to talk about difficult topics. So the experience of loneliness is a very subjective one. This is core to what we're talking about here. Not everyone will experience it in the same way, and it won't have exactly the same impact on everyone. And we won't all experience loneliness for the same reasons. But it's really useful to explore some of the ways that it can manifest and some of the reasons that it is such a difficult thing to explore. So let's first of all look at what some origins of the loneliness experience can be. And I'll reiterate at this point, loneliness is not the same as isolation. So we shouldn't assume that because someone is working physically distant from everybody else, or they're not always in the shared physical working space, that they will be experiencing loneliness. Now, they may be, but it's almost certainly not going to be just because of isolation. Our experience of workplace loneliness can come from our estimate or our calculation or my relationships at work deep enough for me. And what's deep for me may be too deep for you and vice versa. This is a subjective experience. But when I think about the people I work with, how deep, how valued, how important are these relationships? How much do I want? And am I getting that? And if we're not getting what we think we need from this, then we're on that path to experience loneliness. We may be a very gregarious, outgoing, chatty contributor in the team. But if we don't feel that we're heard or our perspectives are understood, we can feel lonely. So this is to help us understand. This isn't the same as socializing or social contact. If we don't feel that our perspective is one that others really get, we can start to feel lonely. If we don't feel that what we do is valued by our colleagues, if we don't feel either that our role, our contribution, or we as a person are valued by others, it doesn't matter what else is going on, then we could start to feel lonely. If the way that we organize our work doesn't give us an opportunity for mutual disclosure, and this is another way of describing small talk, the kind of very short social chats that we have where we find out a little bit more about each other, where I tell you something about my weekend, you tell me something about your plans for next weekend, or we talk about a shared interest, where we don't have that time, or we're being told there is no time for that, or that kind of interpersonal exchange is regarded as unprofessional, then I could start to feel lonely. I'll have lots of conversations. They'll be about the agenda. They'll be about work, but I don't have any depth to the communication I have with those around me. No depth to our relationships. If I don't feel supported, and it doesn't mean that I have to have a problem or a need for support now, but if I think about my colleagues and I can't imagine getting support from them, I could start to experience loneliness. And if there are no obvious opportunities for me to connect with people, if all of my work is done by an electronic medium, that can contribute to efficiency, yes, but interpersonal connection where I can see someone's face, hear their voice, and so on, could lead me to feel quite lonely. And if I don't feel like I'm a good fit, or I share the values or the norms of my team or my organization, no matter how good my performance or how, as I said earlier, sociable or chatty I am, on the inside, I can start to feel lonely. I want to really go into this in detail to push back against that really common view of lonely people as isolated people, or people experiencing loneliness because of their social isolation. We may be working day in, day out with people who we might never guess are experiencing loneliness because it's on the inside. So something that we can all take from thinking about this is to listen a little bit more carefully, to ask more carefully framed questions, to make ourselves available for people when they come to us with their questions, however vague, however not a great fit for what we're doing right now. This could be an example of someone reaching out and taking those first steps that I want to talk about in a couple of moments. Now, that's our experience. That sparks something within us. We start to experience loneliness. Well, what does that mean? We need to think about how our thoughts about the experience and our thoughts about ourselves can then translate into behavior, which can have a negative impact and give us lots of the outcomes that we absolutely want to avoid when it comes to workplace well-being. Now, from an ACT perspective, acceptance and commitment theory, we often talk about the mind being like a thinking engine, just constantly creating content for us, images, plans, memories, self-talk, just all the mental stuff. But our mind is also very apt to judge situations rather than be curious about them, to come to simplistic conclusions, and to be very good at problem solving. But not all of the experiences we have are problems that have a solution. Getting locked out or locking yourself out of your home is a problem that your mind could jump on immediately and start to imagine, who has a key? Is there a window open that I can climb through? Is it likely to rain in the next while? But when we have thoughts about ourselves that we don't like, we have emotions that we don't like, our problem-solving mind can jump on those and say, oh, this is a problem that we need to solve. What are we going to do about this thought or this emotion? And that can take us away from the present moment. That can actually run counter to what could be really helpful for us, which is to notice what's happening around us, to notice what people are discussing, to notice how we might make a contribution. And we can very easily engage in mental time travel and go to a scary future or a disappointing past. And then we can build up a whole litany of stories about ourselves that we tell ourselves, inflexible views of inflexible ways of viewing ourselves. I can, I can't, I am not, an overly simplified view of our identity and our capacity to do new things. We may focus on the real discomfort of what we're perceiving as social rejection. And then our mind that has evolved to keep us safe emphasize the comfort, the avoidance of discomfort. So let's avoid situations that could be uncomfortable. And this means that we get this sort of cyclical experience, this cyclical pattern building up where we can imagine how difficult some things are and we shy away from doing them, which leads to further thoughts about our place and social rejection, and potentially isolates us from opportunities to do the things that could break this loneliness cycle. And so the impact on our behavior is what's really important. From an ACT perspective, I would argue it doesn't matter what we're thinking or feeling. What really matters is what we are doing. And if what we're doing is drawing us further away from connection, then it's really not going to help us. And we might find ourselves going down the route of adopting some unhelpful or unsustainable or avoidant coping strategies. And this pattern of behavior in response to feelings of loneliness play a big role in some of what the research shows us represents an impact on our well-being. Before I go into that, I'm just going to pause for a second and check if there's any additional questions. Anything you'd like to ask, drop it into the chat, or any comments you have about anything I've covered so far. As you're thinking about that, you've probably noticed this is a very big topic. This has roots going out into things like organizational culture, manager capability, team dynamics, self-concept, psychological flexibility. And so it's important to view loneliness from multiple perspectives. There is no one answer to addressing workplace loneliness. And just like if we were looking at a big topic like workplace well-being, we wouldn't put all of the onus on the individual to maintain or improve their well-being. It's also going to be a function of the environment we're in and what the organization supports. So the level of inquiry is important here as well. As I said, our guide focuses on what an individual can do, and we want as many individuals out there as possible to have a look at that and see what they can do with it. But we can also help organizations with this as well. And organizations should be, I would argue, as aware of this as they are of all of the other ways that well-being can be hampered in the workplace. So when I talk about the impact of loneliness, I don't want to be overly negative or to scare anyone, but I do want to underline the point that loneliness has real, tangible, measurable negative impacts on our well-being, both psychological and physical. And we go through this in great detail in the guide. But for people who have loneliness over an extended period of time, they're more likely to report depression, anxiety, reduced self-esteem. They sit at increased risk of burnout at work. They experience hypervigilance, of being on edge, waiting for the shoe to drop, being switched on to threats. That is quite exhausting, quite a difficult way of living. That can impact sleep. And again, it's one of the big topics I've been interested in over the last few years. If we are not getting enough sleep, it basically hampers us in everything that we're required to do in the workplace, and it has a very, very strong impact on skewing our interpretation of what's happening and our ability to manage our emotions. Detracts from our resilience. And all of this so far is psychological, approaching the physical, but we also know that it can actually weaken our immune system. Loneliness can make us sick. And over time, researchers have noted how it can detract from our cardiovascular health. I want to underline an afternoon or two of wondering how you're valued in the team will not lead to these. These are outcomes where loneliness is experienced over an extended period of time. So no more than having low mood on one Monday morning equals depression. No more than feeling a little bit disconnected from your colleagues will result in burnout or having a weakened immune system. But this underlines the really important role that interpersonal connection plays in our well-being. Enough of the bad news. Let's change the tone a little bit and talk about what we can do about this. In our guide, we presented a simple set of activities that people can undertake, presented as skills, and they are interactive, and in a way they are ways of building our psychological flexibility, ways of allowing us to do what matters, even though it might be a little bit uncomfortable. And so we've got 3 levels of inquiry here, 3 areas to focus on to help people better understand values, to help them understand the role of their thinking, and to focus in a new way on their behavior, all of which is overlaid by an awareness of the context they're actually in. So what's actually happening in the here and now, not what my mind has told me will happen in the future, not what my mind is reminding me of what happened 5 years ago, but what's actually happening in this context. Now, we put the skills in the hand of the individual, but also I want to remind everyone that organizations can support this too. And these skills that I've been training people in for years, the evidence base is very strong in showing how developing psychological flexibility it contributes significantly to our well-being and the likelihood of us attaining our goals. So what do we mean when we talk about values? In this sense, it's about reconnecting, reclarifying what's important to us. What's the stuff that really matters? Why is this relevant here? Well, when we're really clear on our desired direction of travel, because that's often how we talk about values, they act as an inner compass, giving us a sense of direction. When we're really clear on that, it can really help us to overcome the momentary discomfort, the momentary doubts about what it's like to reach out to someone, and how we can move in a value direction and move away from very simplistic notions of success, fail, positive, negative, win, fail, but instead moving towards what's really valued, and figuring that out at the beginning plays a big role in that. And of course, we don't complete our values like we do with goals. There are things that stay with us over our lifetime, and they're flexible, and we can apply them in very, very different ways in different circumstances. So this helps each of us move away from fixed views of what it means to be socially connected, gives us a sense of direction so that we can take steps in that direction without feeling that we need to do it all or that there's some success to be had here. Values is about direction, not attainment of goals. Secondly, we talk about a skill set, too, if we're being specific, to do with our thoughts. We're talking about specifically what's technically called diffusion, cognitive diffusion, which is allowing ourselves to get some distance from our thoughts, to see thoughts for what they actually are, not what they say they are. Our thoughts, particularly threat-based thoughts or fear-based thoughts, do not present themselves with any ambiguity. They're quite, avoid this, move away from that. That will be a disaster. But if we're able to see thoughts just as thoughts, we can stop struggling with them. because it's the struggling with our thoughts, the trying to suppress them or change them or somehow debate with our thoughts. It takes us away from the present moment and opportunities to do something helpful for ourselves. We also, when it comes to thinking, we lean into accepting that some of the things that are important for us to do could be uncomfortable, psychologically uncomfortable. They could come with the risk of rejection. They could come with the risk of embarrassment. They could come with the risk of just not feeling like we know what we're doing. But if we're clear on our values and we're not trying to change our thoughts and we accept that some of the discomfort comes with us, then what we're left with is the focus on doing what matters. And when we talk about behavior, it's the direction of travel moving towards what's important to us. What is this stuff we want more of, not what we want to avoid? When we place the emphasis on comfort and avoiding difficult situations, then that's where our focus is. And we'll look for opportunities to make these things easier for ourselves, which is a shortcut to avoidance, experiential avoidance. And that can simply mean our lives get smaller and smaller because we see the threat in interpersonal situations. We can imagine it very clearly. But if we're emphasizing small moves towards, not success, but small moves towards what's important to us, all we need to ask ourselves is what I'm about to do moving me towards that? Or is this moving me away from some kind of imagined or real discomfort? This helps us. It's not a foolproof, but it really helps us avoid inflexible views of ourselves, imagining life in terms of a binary success, fail. And it helps minimize, when we do these things, the chance of us always avoiding so-called risky situations where we might have to put ourselves out there a little bit. We want to remove all or as much of the anxiety about this as possible. And what I mean by that is we want to scale it down, because sometimes well-meaning advice throws people in at the deep end. So we'd rather present social connection as a habit we can cultivate. And the important thing about being psychologically flexible is that we're not focused on, for example, feeling confident. We're not focused on feeling happy. We're focused on doing what matters, and confidence may follow from that. Happiness may follow from that. But we're not taking our cues from the things that will make us happy, or we believe will make us happy. We're focused on doing the stuff that's really meaningful to us. So when we think about the habits that contribute to this social connection, it's almost what we've been talking about, the opposite of what I've just been talking about, ensuring that we're focused on now. If we're in the present moment, we're able to notice what's happening, what people are discussing. We are able to see opportunities for more values-aligned behavior rather than getting stuck in our minds with thoughts about the future or the past. If we can listen to the people around us with intent, if we're intentionally listening to understand them and their perspectives, we can see commonality where we might not have spotted it before. We can see opportunities to reach out, or opportunities to see them in a new light. We emphasize small steps. Now, in our guide, we have a case study, fictional case study of an individual who is feeling lonely for various reasons in his job. And the small steps he starts to explore is about having a shared coffee with someone remotely, not even in the same office, but doing that over video call. Starting small, building confidence as a result of doing is what really works here. And there's a very important point when it comes to our habits. When we try to change our behavior and do new things, we're tempted to see, well, what am I getting from this? What are the results? Because I'm going through the pain, where is the gain? And of course, we may not be successful in the short term. It might take a while to build these things up. And so what we want to emphasize is consistency of the behavior and ensuring that we're doing more of the stuff that matters rather than focusing on results. The way that I put it to my coachees in one-on-one work is no more than you would go to the gym once and expect to come out looking like an Olympian. You have repeated gym visits to get the results you're looking for. So we need repeated conversations, repeated reaching out, repeated interpersonal risk taking, not expecting all of our thoughts about our relationships, all of our feelings to change after doing it once. And so that's why interpersonal connection is best thought of as an ongoing journey, an ongoing area of focus for us, not a task to be achieved. Just like our well-being, our finances, our household, our career, these are ongoing areas of focus. So this is something that we'll maintain a focus on and not imagine once I've done these things, I'll never feel bad about interpersonal connection again. It's a job of work for us. So what next? First of all, to flag for anyone who's interested how we can support you and your organization. I emphasize this is not all down to the individual. So we can also support organizations who want to take an evidence-based approach to this and introduce ways of doing things and support for their employees to either address or minimize the chance of loneliness and disconnection. We can, of course, provide one-to-one coaching for employees. And incidentally, that's how workplace loneliness came to my attention. Over the last 5 years, noticing how more and more coachees were describing loneliness without using that L word for lots of different reasons. But this strange sense of disconnection that it took them quite a while until they arrived at, yes, it is actually loneliness I'm experiencing. But we can actually also do team level interventions to support connection. We have one specific workshop for employees, which covers these skills I've been talking about, the Connect and Thrive workshop, which is preceded by some online learning, and then an interactive session to put the skills into practice. And one that I've been running for the last couple of years, we call the Power of Conversation, which is for those people who have supervisory responsibility to enable them to understand the role of conversations on the continuum from social chats all the way through to the more formalized interactions that we have, and how to cultivate some of that really important stuff. To role model conversations, have better quality conversations with their team members, and how to nurture an environment where people are more likely to experience higher levels of psychological safety. So for you, I would encourage you to explore our resources online. We've got a gathering of combination of podcast episodes and blog posts, and we've got our free guide there that you can download. I'll be in touch with the slides from this session. I'd encourage everyone who's been interested enough to turn up today to look for simple ways to connect with the people around you. Don't assume that because you're okay, they're okay. Don't assume that your need for connection is the same as theirs. Listen out for what they might be asking you. And please get in touch with your follow-up questions once you've had a chance to read the guide, listen to the podcast, and look at those other resources online. I hope you found this introduction to the area useful. I hope it's provoked some thinking and will do over the next few days and weeks. I really do mean that about getting in touch. I think everyone should have my email address as a result of registering for this, but if you don't, it's simply richard@worklifepsych.com. Feel free to get in touch one-on-one with any questions. We've still got a few moments before our hour is up. Any final questions or comments before we go our separate ways for today? Thanks, Kate. That's good to know you found it helpful. So while you're thinking about your questions, I'd love this ringing in your ears. Loneliness is a problem. It's difficult for individuals, but it's not just the responsibility of individuals. I think we all have a responsibility to listen out and look for the people that we work with. And if you're an organizational leader in any capacity, I'd love for you to have a think about how you have organized your ways of working in a way that could support interpersonal connection and the building of deeper relationships. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Thanks for the feedback, guys. It's great that you were able to join me. I'm going to be editing the recording of this and publishing it, and that will be live in the next couple of days. And we'll continue to add to the Connect and Thrive resources page. So if you have local resources you'd like us to add, we'll do that as well. But for now, thank you all so much for joining me. Have a great rest of your day.